Morning, everyone. Yes, I am standing in for Graham again. Apparently, difficulties with a cafe. I don't know the details. But yes, I am substitute Graham again, which actually means I need the hat. So this is substitute Graham. Okay, so today we're going to be talking something quite interesting. Well, I think so anyway. So Labour's candidate for the Mid-Bedfordshire seat, which is Nadine Dorries' seat, should she decide to resign at any point before the general election, then there'll be a by-election there. Labour have already been campaigning there, as you can see behind me. That's when Keir Starmer was out with the Labour candidate, Alistair Strathern. And the Conservatives have suddenly decided to have a pop. Well, you'd expect them to have a pop at him, actually. That's par for the course. But they've specifically said that Labour should get rid of him, should replace him. Oh, he's not a suitable candidate. And my first thought was, well, I'm not sure it's really up to the Conservatives to decide who Labour candidates should be. But the other thing is then you think to yourself, so what is the reason? Because there's two possible reasons for this. I'll put up the headline just so you can see. So this is in the Times here. And, you know, people like Grant Shapps, for example, have been saying, oh, Labour should get rid of him. He's an eco-zealot. And they're basing this on the idea that Alistair Strathern is a member of Greenpeace, as a lot of people are, and took part in a demonstration for Greenpeace. And you think, oh, was he one of the ones who climbed into Rishi Sunak's house and put the thing up? No, he's not. He hasn't taken part in anything like that. He hasn't done anything even remotely illegal. He dressed up as a zombie and held a sort of tombstone-shaped placard in Westminster, in a public place, in Parliament Square. And that's it. That's his activism. Now, there's two possibilities for the Conservatives saying that actually Labour should get rid of him. So let me know what you think. So here's the two possibilities. The first is that they think they've got something, you know, a bit like ULEZ with Uxbridge. It's like, oh, this is the thing we can fight Labour with in Mid-Bedfordshire. Now, I will remind people, Mid-Bedfordshire is a really weird place. It's one of those places you would think, in actual fact, the main rivals for the Conservatives would be the Lib Dems. But polling so far is showing that the Lib Dems are not making any headway. It's not showing that Labour are making headway, but it is showing that they have boosted their sort of share of the vote a little, according to polling anyway, compared with the last election. And the Tory share has collapsed. So actually the polls at the moment indicate that Labour are in the best position to take it from them. But it is very odd that the Lib Dems have not made gains. But that is the situation at the moment. So you could argue this is the Conservatives thinking, oh, we'll use the Greenpeace angle against him. That'll help us fight it. Because obviously Greenpeace took part in that questionable stunt where they sort of broke into Rishi Sunak's house. Well, not into the house, but, you know, around the house to carry out that stunt. Which I am going to say, things like that, it's what I think protesting outside someone's house under certain circumstances, I think that's okay. You do have to remember there are other people in the house. There are children, and for example, you know, quite young children, really. But anyway, is it because the Conservatives think they can use that? You know, almost like as a bit of a just stop oil thing. The problem is that Greenpeace are much better respected than just stop oil. But is it that they think they've got something on him, or is it because otherwise I would think, you know, if you're going to be doing that, surely you just attack the candidate. Oh, these candidates, one of these eco-zealots, he's one of these just stop oil types. Oh, no, he wouldn't be a suitable MP for you at all. But they're not doing that. They're specifically calling for Labour to deselect him effectively, get rid of him, get a new candidate. And Labour, of course, have told them to sod off. Then you think there's the other side of it. Hi, David Blase. Good morning. I hope everyone is well as well. Is there another side to it? You know the saying, was it Napoleon who said, never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake? Because sometimes you think to yourself, do you know what? How many times have we seen a situation where a Tory minister has done something like really terrible, and they've said, oh, Labour should call for them to resign, and Labour don't call for them to resign, you think, well, why not? And sometimes you think to yourself, it's probably because Labour are quite happy with them because they're absolutely trashing the Conservatives' reputation. You know, much better to have, if the Tories want to have a senior member of their front bench being someone who upsets the public, great, fantastic. And then you think the same thing. So never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. So when the Conservatives are actually calling for Labour to get rid of this guy, isn't that the opposite? Isn't that maybe because they actually fear him? Because Mid-Bedfordshire will also be one of these places. I don't know the character of the local area terribly well, but I imagine it's one of these typical sort of Tory heartland places where actually the environment's quite high on the agenda. You know, there's the global picture, the climate emergency picture, which has a lot of support even amongst Conservative voters. But in places like that, it's also the old green and pleasant land thing. So someone who, and remember, someone who is, I mean, actually call him a Greenpeace activist is probably going a bit far because he, as far as can be told, he's taken place in one very peaceful protest. He dressed up as a zombie on one occasion, that's it. And you think to yourself, well, what's with the Hatfield disguised as Graham? No, I am substitute Graham. This is the substitute Graham hat because I'm not supposed to be doing it on a Wednesday, but Graham is otherwise occupied. Well, it's not that he's otherwise occupied. Well, he is. He's just not in the house. So he'd have dodgy internet connection. But yeah, I'm actually now thinking maybe they're worried that because he will be on top of his game on environmental issues, and, you know, things like the water pollution, for example, or destruction of the countryside. And you think to yourself, maybe they're worried that he is a candidate who will be on top of those local issues. Quite remarkable there. Oh, you've heard the quote attributed to Sun Tzu. I do have Sun Tzu's Art of War. Some things get, you know, maybe lost in translation as well. I tend to associate with Napoleon, but you know, it's such an obvious thing, I suppose, that any number of people may have said it. But yeah, is it a sign maybe that the Conservatives are a bit sort of panicky because, you know, if you look at like the recent by-elections, so they dodged a bullet with Uxbridge and South Ruislip. They failed to dodge the bullet with Somerton and how do they pronounce it now? Frome. It's not spelt Frome though, is it? And then Selby and Aintree, they lost as well. But you think about all of those places. If the Conservatives lost Mid-Bedfordshire, that would actually be really bad. That would be North Shropshire level of bad in terms of how safe the seat is. It would be North Shropshire level. Only if the Conservatives lost it to Labour, that would be way worse. You know, if the Conservatives lost it to the Lib Dems, that is not as bad for them because what they can say, quite truthfully, is, first of all, the Lib Dems do tend to do very well in by-elections because they're the natural home of the protest vote. So if you want to give either the Conservatives or Labour, depending on who's in government, a bit of a shot across the bows, a by-election's a great time to do it because you're not actually changing the government. You know, when people are voting for a general election, they sort of have who do we want as government in mind. But in a by-election, you can absolutely use it as a protest vote. So they can easily dismiss that. And they know that the Lib Dems do not have the resources to fight a lot of seats in the general election. They're going to have to really focus on like 30. Maybe they could get more seats than that with very focused local groups. But if they lose Mid-Bedfordshire to Labour, like that's worse than the North, because North Shropshire was lost to the Lib Dems. And the Tories will take it back at the next general election. But if Labour can take Mid-Bedfordshire, even if Labour don't really boost their share of the vote much, if it is just caused by a collapse in the Tory vote, the optics of it are absolutely terrible. Harry Madmerk saying that, Phil, the amount of vitriol, abuse, some racial and borderline threats that Mayor Khan gets on some anti-ULEZ YouTube channels. Absolutely disgusting for me. The problem with politics in general, and you get this on all sides, is when... See, if you sometimes I compare it to like supporting your sports teams. Let's say football. Football can be quite aggressive. Some football support can be quite aggressive, and you just step back and think, look, it's a game. You know, it's serious to the players because it's their profession, but to the fans, yes, you're paying your money, you're invested in it, but at the end of the day, it's just a game. You know, I am more of a fan. I don't like football. I watch football, but I don't like get really emotional about it. I mean, for example, when the England team got through effectively yesterday, and we weren't the best side, I wouldn't have been bitterly disappointed if we'd have lost that penalty shootout, because it's like, you know, Nigeria were the better team. I actually felt a little bit bad for very bad for Nigeria, because we were not the best. I just want the best team to win. I like the idea that the team I support is the best team, but I want the best team. But there are some who take it a bit far. But politics is very different, because politics matters. It matters a great deal. If we look at a really extreme example, the polarization of politics in the United States. So what's happening is Donald Trump obviously is now facing potentially justice. Obviously, we don't know. No, he hasn't been convicted of anything. But he's facing a number of trials on a number of different potential misdemeanors, right? And the more he is put under sort of legal spotlight, the more popular he becomes. You know, it's like one of these really weird situations where if none of this legal action was being taken against Donald Trump, he wouldn't really be on for winning the next presidential election. But his popularity has been boosted. You think, well, why is this? Is it because so many Americans support criminals? No, they don't think he's a criminal. They think it's a witch hunt. And the thing is, they think that it's a witch hunt because Donald Trump is the key to, you know, making America great again. They believe that. They believe that. So, of course, they behave, you know, you'll get a lot of extreme behavior, because they think that Trump supporters think that they are fighting for the future of their country. They think this is for the children and future generations. But those arranged against Trump think the same thing. You know, so you have this polarization where people on both sides think that the very future, potentially of humanity, some of them go that far, depends upon defending or imprisoning Donald Trump. And you see similar things like that in this country as well. So there are people, you've got to remember, you know, if we think about some of the lies that are told about things like ULEZ coming to Sadiq Khan, and some of them are lies. You know, these are grifters who know what the truth is, and for their own selfish interests, lie to people. But the vast majority of people on that sort of side, in that tribe, believe it, right? They believe it. And they think it's really important. So they buy the lie that actually what Sadiq Khan doing is attacking people, standard of living. Even though, if you think about the Tories, they have explicitly said with interest rate rises that they encourage that policy because they want people to have less money to spend to get inflation down. So the Tories are open about the fact that they want to stop people having disposable income. And yet these same Tories will say, oh, Sadiq Khan's trying to charge you money just to use your car. It's an attack on freedom. But there are people who believe it because they don't join the dots. And because politics is important, people can go too far. And they can go too far on either side. You can have people who, you know, support the things I support, and I think that they're in the right, but their behavior can still be, you know, unhelpful at best, because then you think to yourself, but, you know, to win a political argument, you need people who disagree with you to stop disagreeing with you. That's how you win a political argument. Unless you're already in the winning position. If you're already in the winning position, then you just need to maintain your support. But if you're in a losing position, as I always am politically, because the establishment is not in favour of the things I'm in favour of, so I'm always in a losing position. So you're always in that position where you need more allies. So, for example, I want proportional representation. I need more people to agree with me. I want to join the EU. I need more people to agree with me. I want public services nationalised. I need more people to agree with me. So I'm constantly needing more allies. So I can't really afford to go calling too many, unless I think they're just permanently lost to me. I can't afford to go being rude to people who disagree with me, because those are potential allies. But anyway, Manuel, there was an article in The Guardian yesterday about the possible link between antibiotic resistance and air pollution. Yes, I saw that. In fact, there's several things about that. But indeed, but even without it's almost like that's another thing to throw onto the pile. Air pollution does kill people without us needing to know more ways in which it can harm us or indirectly cause damage to us. And we know that we're moving to a position where we're like Labour, for example, have gone cool on expansion of ULEZ across other cities, even though, see, this is the thing about ULEZ, it's like it exists in other cities as well. There are other cities that have it, and there was never any big national outcry about it. Now, where there is an outcry, obviously the local administration thinks about it. So Manchester, for example, Andy Burnham wanted to introduce it in Manchester. Huge public backlash. Now he's not going to for a while. It's shelved. But that's how it works. That is how it's supposed to work. You can't. There are policies that are the right policies, but if they don't have popular support, there's no point pursuing them because you will lose power and then you won't be able to put them in anyway. So you have to bring the public with you. There are cities around the country where the public were on board with it and they've introduced it and it's not a problem. The same applied in London. It is popular in London. There are pockets of unpopularity, and even some of those pockets of unpopularity are caused because they don't actually realise it's not actually, when you had the situation in Uxbridge where a Tesla owner was moaning about it because they'd have to pay $12.50 a day, and it's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. So some of it will be ignorance as well, but air pollution. And the thing is, they conflate it with environmental policies. Well, it's not an environmental policy; it's a public health policy. Air pollution does kill. We've known this for a long time. I mean, smog in London used to be so bad that you get killed going for a walk. What happened was there was a particular time, long before I was born, when there were just so many deaths from it that the government said, well, we need to act. And they introduced Clean Air Acts. All this is an extension of that. People are dying from dirty air. We don't need to. We have the technology to be able to live our lives without producing this sort of pollution. And that's all that's happening. There's a £2,000 grant. I was saying when I talked about this last, you can buy a ULEZ compliant car for a few £100s. For £2,000, not a problem. The bigger problem is for people with vans, but even then I think there's, that you can get more money if you need to replace a van. But that's the issue. There are grants available for people who live in London. Enough money to just get a car that's compliant. Just do that. You get a nice new, well, it's not going to be a new car, but you get a car out of it that is a newer car. But anyway, the problem with the cars in Manchester was that it wasn't publicised until all these cameras and signs suddenly appeared saying it was starting in a matter of weeks and nobody knew about it. Ah, I see. See, I didn't know all the details. I don't live in Manchester anymore. But I was aware that there was a bit of a public backlash, and then Andy Burnham had to go, oh, no, okay, then. Yeah, okay, so if it was poor messaging, then there you go. That explains that one. Phil stole Graham's hat again. I don't think it's quite the same hat. This one's from Peru. I don't know where his is from. Not that I think all the hats in Peru look like this. In fact, the sort of traditional one looks very different. You checked on the website and even your wife's 16-year-old modus is exempt. There's so many things that are exempt. It's like, you know, the latest stats on it, I think from Transport for London quite recently, were 6% of cars in the current ULEZ zone, 6% were not compliant. I mean, the people who'll really be hit by it will be those who don't live in London, because they won't be able to get the grant. So they don't. So people travel into London, but then again, I always think, I can understand from the point of view of people who need to for their work, like in a van or something like that. But you know, people in a car. If you don't live in London, why would you drive anywhere near? I would hate to drive anywhere near London, and it does have good public transport as well, so there should be no need. Admittedly, it would be. I know that some public transport is very expensive, but that is another issue. Should be more measures to regulate pollution, or the earth will extinguish. Well, again, this is two things, isn't it? I mean, the earth won't extinguish. First of all, I never sort of go with that. The earth's fine. The earth's a big ball. The only thing we can do to damage the earth is to blow its crust apart with nuclear weapons. No, the earth will be fine. It's us that's knackered. But again, there's a difference here. The air pollution, very different. Air pollution isn't damaging our environment. It's damaging the local environment of people who live in cities. It's not damaging the human race, but that's not a reason for not dealing with air pollution. Then when we're talking about sort of carbon pollution, which is the main one globally, that is a separate issue. And yes, we are already suffering the impacts of not having taken it seriously. Decades ago, when scientists said, you need to take this seriously. I remember growing up and scientists were saying, you need to take this seriously. And the media would go, oh, the opinion is divided. Yeah, the opinion is divided between scientists and oil companies. You say the problem is a 2014 diesel could be worth far more than the scrappage allowance. Well, sell it then. Obviously, you probably won't be able to sell it in London. Just sell it. Auto Trader dispelled the myth in an article by listing 5,000 cars under 2,000 that were ULEZ compliant. I mean, I did a quick check myself. I just looked, you know, cars around London, and there's so many. And even, you know, there's so many. And cars are really quite reliable these days. I remember when I was growing up and just getting into, my first car was a Ford Escort. And it had problems. There were problems. And there was, at the time, we used to say about Fords, I got it because it was cheap, it was my first car, that Ford stood for found on road dead, because they always had problems. Whereas the last car I had was a Ford Focus, and I got rid of it when it was 13 years old, and I never had any problems with it. Like, you know, I had to get new tyres with it, and, you know, I did get it serviced each year, but I never had a breakdown with it. I never had a problem with it. You know, I needed just the usual maintenance. Sometimes new tyres. I needed new brakes sometimes. But I never had it break down. And that was 13 years old when I got it, and it was still fine. I just wanted a different car. So, you know, these days, even an old, so there was a time when if you had a car, like particularly a Ford or something, that was 10 years old, you would think, you wouldn't want to buy a 10-year-old Ford. But nowadays, it's like, as long as they've not been trashed, they'll be fine. Do I think buses becoming free should become free to help with air quality? So I certainly think, see, again, recently in the news, I may talk about this later on today on my own channel. So since the Tories have come to power, the number of bus services has literally been halved. There are now half the number of bus routes that there were. And that particularly affects like an area where I live, if you don't have a car, you're in trouble, you know, and because there's like a couple of buses and that's it, a day. And so, yeah, we need better public transport. And if it were much cheaper, shall we say, you know, with like concessions to people, you know, so you could certainly allow free travel to, you could have it means tested. I'm not always in favour of universal free access to certain services. There are some services where I think means test it. So people below a certain income, for example, absolutely. Because it's one of these things, it's like if you make public transport free for everyone, there's a certain cost attached to it. And you think to yourself, but what if we just made it free to people below a certain level of income? But cost effective, what you need to do is you need to make it cost effective. You need to make it so that it's cheaper than using your car. Because using your car is more convenient. So what I would say is if you want to reduce the use of cars, first of all, provide a public transport alternative. Because like I say, in the little market town I live in, hardly any buses, no train, because there's no train station anywhere near me. I can't get a train from, there's miles to the nearest train station. So you have to drive to the bloody train station in the next big town. It's, you know, it's ridiculous. So there is no real public transport where I am. So you need to make a public transport alternative. You need to be able to get, it will already be less, and you also need to not actually have as much parking for cars. Certainly make it cheaper, but then also make it as convenient. So if you need to drive to the supermarket to fill up, you know, no one wants to get onto the bus with like armsfuls of shopping and then the arse falls out your bag or something. So yeah, okay, if people have a car, they can do that. But for just going into town to go to the cinema or something, make sure there's a bus available. Oh, you were saying about Ford fix or repair daily. Oh, that was another one. So yeah, but it had a reputation. However you sort of broke it down, Fords have a bit of a reputation at the time for being unreliable. Now they're fine, absolutely fine. Any jokes with Nissan? Now I had a Nissan once, and the only thing I had wrong with it was this was also a very old car, and it was mostly fine. The only thing I had, technically, I did have a catastrophic failure with the Nissan, but it was not the problem with the engineering of the car. What happened was I took it somewhere for my MOT, a very dodgy garage. I didn't realise it was dodgy. And they thought they were doing me a favour. They mentioned something about the exhaust, but someone said, oh, we've sorted it for you. Now, if I'd have taken it to a sensible garage, they'd have said, yeah, you need this bit of your exhaust replacing. But they didn't. They bodged it up. They thought they were doing me a favour, saving me money. I wasn't interested in saving money. I wanted my car roadworthy. So I was driving on holiday. We were going down south camping, and the exhaust suddenly dropped off the bloody car. So then so they weren't saving me money, because then I had to get picked up and taken to Quick Save, and they're proper rob dogs, for them to fit the new exhaust. That cost me a bloody fortune if it had just replaced the bloody thing. So I have no issue with Nissans, but my personal experience of the one Nissan car I had was not great. But it was a very old car. Again, I had no money at the time. It was a very old car, and even then, it was just a crap mechanic who screwed me over. The problem with that is if you get it free, then a promotion in your work, and then it's not free, your budget changes. I'm not sure what that's in relation to. But no, if we go back, because I was waffling then, if we go back to the idea of should public transport be free, I can see it needs to be cheaper than taking your car. Like if I get a bus from here, say to Scunthorpe, it needs to work out cheaper to get the bus to the return ticket than it would cost me in petrol to use the car. The car is still more convenient if I can get easy parking to where I'm going. So there will still be an incentive. And also I can just do it when I want. I don't have to wait at a bus stop. But if the buses were every half hour and they were cheaper, so that way you could still have people on an income like mine pay for it, but people on low incomes get it for free, pensioners get it for free, then that I would absolutely support. But what is most needed is the roots to exist in the first place. You cannot have a situation where a community like mine has a bus a couple of times a day, either end of the day, because, for example, if you need it to get to work, you can't get to that work unless it gets you there before your start time and sets off after your clocking off time. And so there'll be lots of jobs where that's not the case. So there's jobs going in like Scunthorpe or Doncaster where I am. They may be struggling. We've got labour shortage around the country, right? So they may be struggling for staff. There may be people living here that could do those jobs, but they can't get to them. So there's an economic requirement to make sure that we have good public transport. And the other thing as well is if we nationalised buses, then it wouldn't cost as much anyway. You'd naturally bring the price down, because if you've got a nationalised bus service as compared to a private bus service, it's really simple. You still have to pay for the buses. You still have to pay to maintain and store the buses. You have to pay for the drivers. You have to pay for your admin staff, your timetabling, logistics, all the rest of it. What you don't have to pay is profits. So it's always cheaper. You can also be more efficient. I remember when I was a teenager growing up in South Yorkshire, there was basically one bus company, right, across South Yorkshire. So if you bought a day saver ticket, you could get anywhere around South Yorkshire. You know, I could go to Meadowhall and then go into Sheffield city centre, and I could then come back to Doncaster at the end of it. You know, riding several buses with my day saver ticket. Whereas now there are so many different companies that you get a day saver ticket, only works for that company. But anyway, last few then, going back to cars here, I had a 1999 Fiesta. It was fine apart from the rust, radiator, aircon and the brake cable. They were issues. Brake cables can be issues, yes. It ran fine, could do 130 miles and back easily. So I've had a couple of Fiestas. The second one was a death trap, but again, there's been lots of times in my life when I've had no money and I've had to get really cheap cars. I've had a lot of cars. And it was a hell of a death trap. But that was just unfortunate. I just had one that had been absolutely wrecked and I had to buy it privately, not at a proper dealer, because I literally had like no money. It was a few £100. But the previous Fiesta I had, which I got rid of at a ripe old age as well, it was very nice, yes, it worked fine. I did have one problem with it, in that when at the end of its life, I couldn't open the driver's side door from the outside, but you just got in through the passenger side. I didn't have to get in through the passenger side. I just had to open the passenger door and open it worked from the inside. You could open it from the inside. So that was, you know, I mean, that's not the worst thing to happen. But anyway, there we go. We've sort of run out of time again. We've been meandering today, meandering. But thanks very much anyway for coming on. Hope you have a great day. Don't forget to click the like button and to subscribe to the channel. And I will be on normally tomorrow, but I haven't decided what we'll be talking about yet. But have a good day, and until next time, I will see you later.